The dust-laden wind whipped against Sarah Fairfield's trembling face, her tear-stained cheeks already raw from crying as she stood at the edge of Copper Creek clutching nothing but a small bundle of belongings and the secret growing inside her. "You have until sundown to be gone from this town," Mayor Wilson had declared, his gavel striking with finality while the townspeople she'd known all her life turned their backs on her. All except for one man, Thomas Rutherford, whose weathered Stetson now appeared on the horizon, riding hard toward her with determination etched across his sun-bronzed face. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself before Thomas reached her. The spring of 1875 had brought new life to the Wyoming Territory, wildflowers blossoming across the plains, but for Sarah, it had brought nothing but shame and exile. At 22, she had become the town's latest scandal, an unmarried woman with child, and the pious folks of Copper Creek would not abide such sin in their midst. Thomas dismounted his chestnut stallion, Rusty, in a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. At 27, he'd made a name for himself as one of the territory's most skilled cattle drivers, a man who could navigate the treacherous trails between Texas and Wyoming with minimal losses. His blue eyes, clear as mountain lakes, found hers. "They cannot do this to you, Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This is wrong." "They already have," she replied, gesturing to the small bag at her feet that contained everything she now owned. The town council was unanimous. "I'm to be gone by sundown or face imprisonment for public indecency." Thomas removed his hat, revealing dark hair with strands of copper caught in the late afternoon sun. His jaw clenched as he looked back toward the town, its church steeple rising above the buildings like an accusing finger pointed at the heavens. "Then I'm leaving too," he declared. Sarah shook her head, pressing her hand against her still flat stomach. "I can't ask that of you, Thomas. You have prospects here, respect. You're not bound to me or this child." "I made my choice the moment I held you that night under the stars," he said, stepping closer. "I knew what could happen, and I accepted it. I won't abandon you now." The memory of that night 3 months ago by the creek, with the spring cattle drive complete and celebration in the air, warmed Sarah despite her predicament. Thomas had danced with her at the town gathering, his strong hands respectful yet longing. Later, away from judging eyes, those same hands had caressed her with a tenderness that made her feel truly cherished for the first time in her life. "Where would we go?" she asked, fear and hope battling within her. "How would we live?" Thomas smiled, a flash of confidence breaking through his concern. "North, into the untamed country. I've seen land there, Sarah, beautiful land with rivers running clear and meadows stretching as far as the eye can see. Land that isn't claimed yet where a man can stake his future. Homesteading. Just the two of us." The very idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Thomas took her hands in his, calloused palms against her softer skin. "I've been saving every penny from my cattle drives. I have enough to get us started: tools, seeds, livestock. I can build us a home, Sarah, a real home beyond their judgment, beyond their walls of hypocrisy and scorn." A wagon approached from town, dust billowing behind it. Benjamin Caldwell, the general store owner and one of the few who had shown Sarah kindness, pulled his team to a stop beside them. "I thought you might need supplies," he said, avoiding Sarah's eyes out of embarrassment for the town's actions. "It's not much, but there's flour, coffee, salt pork, and some blankets." "That's mighty kind of you, Ben," Thomas said, helping the older man down from the wagon. Benjamin looked nervously over his shoulder. "The mayor's forming a committee to ensure you leave, Sarah. They'll be coming within the hour." He hesitated, then pressed a small pouch into her hands. "My wife wanted you to have this. Seeds from her garden vegetables that'll grow in the northern country." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "Please thank Martha for me." Benjamin nodded, then turned to Thomas. "You're going with her then?" "I am," Thomas confirmed, "and I'd be obliged if you'd witness something before we go." He turned to Sarah, his expression suddenly serious. Sarah Fairfield, I should have asked this before now, but I'm asking it proper. Will you marry me and let me be a father to your child, our child? Sarah gasped, her free hand covering her mouth. Despite their intimacy, despite the life growing inside her that they had created together, she hadn't dared hope for marriage. Thomas, you don't have to, I want to, he interrupted. I've wanted to since the first time I saw you serving apple pie at the Harvest Festival 3 years ago. This isn't duty, Sarah. It's love. Benjamin cleared his throat. I'm not a preacher, but I was a justice of the peace back in Missouri. I could perform a legal marriage if that's what you both want. Sarah looked from Benjamin to Thomas, seeing the sincerity in both men's faces. Beyond them, Copper Creek sprawled in the distance, the town that had been her home for all her life now casting her out. But before her stood a man offering her a new home, a new life. Yes, she whispered, then found her voice. Yes, Thomas, I will marry you. The simple ceremony took place right there on the trail, with only the Wyoming sky as witness beyond Benjamin. Thomas placed his mother's ring, which he'd carried in his pocket since her passing, on Sarah's finger. It was slightly too large, but she vowed never to remove it. Benjamin signed the marriage certificate with a shaking hand. I'll file this with the territorial records when I make my supply run next month, he promised. It'll be legal and binding. The sound of horses in the distance spurred them to action. Thomas quickly loaded Sarah's belongings and Benjamin's supplies into his own pack horse's saddlebags. The northern trail forks about 15 miles ahead, Benjamin advised. Take the eastern fork, not the western. The western leads to Blackwater Canyon, too dangerous this time of year with the spring floods. Eastern fork, Thomas repeated. Thank you, Ben, for everything. Benjamin mounted his wagon. God go with you both, he hesitated, and with your little one. As Benjamin's wagon disappeared back toward town, Thomas helped Sarah onto Rusty, then mounted behind her, his arms creating a protective circle around her as he took the reins. They'll expect us to head west toward the Montana Territory, he said close to her ear. We'll go north instead, toward the unclaimed lands near the Bighorn Mountains. Sarah leaned back against his solid chest. How far? 5 days hard riding, maybe more. We'll need to pace ourselves for your condition. His hand briefly touched her abdomen. Our child needs you healthy. The approaching riders from town appeared over the rise as Thomas urged Rusty forward. Sarah couldn't help looking back at the only home she'd known, the place where her parents were buried, the community that had raised her after their passing. Now that same community watched from a distance as she rode away in disgrace. Don't look back, Thomas whispered. Our life is ahead of us now. She turned her face forward toward the vast expanse of prairie and the distant mountains that would become their new home. As Rusty's steady gait carried them farther from Copper Creek with each passing moment, Sarah felt the strangest sensation taking root alongside her fear-hope. Thomas and Sarah rode until dusk, making camp in a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek. While Thomas unsaddled the horses and set up a small tent with canvas he'd packed, Sarah gathered wood for a fire, grateful for the physical activity to distract her from her tumultuous emotions. We'll need to be careful with fire, Thomas explained as he built a small, sheltered flame. Don't want to draw attention if anyone's following. Sarah nodded, sitting on a fallen log and watching him work. His movements were efficient, practiced a man accustomed to making camp in the wilderness. Do you think they'll follow us? Thomas shrugged. Mayor Wilson might send the sheriff a short way just to ensure you've left the county, but they won't pursue us far. They got what they wanted, you gone from their sight, so they can pretend sin doesn't exist in their perfect little town. The bitterness in his voice surprised her. Thomas had always been respected in Copper Creek, his skills as a cattleman and his fair dealings earning him a good reputation. You gave up everything for me, she said quietly. Your standing in the community, your job with the Cattlemen's Association. Thomas looked up from the fire, flames dancing in his blue eyes. I gave up nothing worth keeping, Sarah. A town that would cast out a woman in your condition isn't a town I want to be part of. He moved to sit beside her on the log, taking her cold hands in his. Besides, I've been saving to start my own ranch for years. This just moved up my timeline. Sarah smiled weakly. Some wedding night this is, hiding in the wilderness, running from disgrace. Thomas laughed softly. Well, Mrs. Rutherford, I admit it's not the hotel in Cheyenne I once dreamed of taking you to, but… He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small jar of honey and a slightly squashed bundle wrapped in paper. I do have a wedding gift for you. Sarah unwrapped the package to find sweet biscuits, clearly purchased from Martha Caldwell's bakery before their hasty departure. Oh, Thomas, every bride deserves something sweet on her wedding day, he said, opening the honey jar. They shared the biscuits with honey by the fire, the simple meal somehow more meaningful than any elaborate wedding feast could have been. When they finished, Thomas took her hand and led her to the small tent. I'll sleep outside, he said. You need your rest. Sarah held onto his hand. You're my husband now. Please stay with me. In the close confines of the tent, their lovemaking was gentle, mindful of her condition, but no less passionate than that first night by the creek. Afterward, with her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, Sarah felt the first real peace she'd experienced since discovering she was with child. I'll build you a proper home, Thomas whispered into her hair, with real walls and a roof that doesn't leak. Our child will have a good life, Sarah. I promise you that. She believed him. The next 4 days passed in a blur of travel, each day taking them farther from civilization and deeper into the untamed Northern Territory. Thomas proved to be a skilled guide, finding water sources, game for food, and sheltered spots to make camp each night. They avoided the few established trails, instead making their way through valleys and along ridgelines where they were less likely to encounter other travelers. On the 5th morning, Sarah awoke feeling ill, the now familiar nausea of pregnancy intensified by the constant movement. Thomas insisted they rest for the day, setting up camp near a small stream where clear, cold water rushed over smooth stones. We're making good time, he assured her as he helped her settle on a blanket in the shade. A day's rest will do you good. Sarah gratefully accepted the cup of willow bark tea he prepared for her, an old remedy his mother had taught him for settling the stomach. How much farther to this paradise you found? Thomas pointed north. Another 2 days, maybe 3 at our current pace. It's a valley nestled against the foothills of the Big Horns. Good water, sheltered from the worst of the winter winds, and soil rich enough to grow just about anything. How did you find it? Sarah asked. Sipping her tea, Thomas sat beside her, his hat pushed back on his head. 3 years ago, after the cattle drive to Cheyenne, I took my pay and instead of gambling it away like the other drovers, I rode north exploring. I've been back twice since then, making sure it was as good as I remembered. And no one has claimed it. It's far from the established settlements, difficult to access unless you know the way. His expression grew more serious. There are natives in the region, mostly peaceful Shoshone these days. The Sioux and Cheyenne have been pushed farther north and east. We'll need to be respectful, establish good relations. Sarah thought of the stories she'd heard of conflicts between settlers and native tribes, of violence on both sides. Will they accept us? If we show respect for their ways and their land, there's a chance for peace. Thomas took her hand. This isn't like the earlier days of settlement, Sarah. The big conflicts are mostly over, at least in this territory. Now it's about finding a way to coexist. Sarah nodded, but anxiety still gnawed at her. They were venturing into the unknown with a baby on the way and no community to support them. Yet the alternative, the shame and rejection they'd left behind, was unthinkable. I'm scared, she admitted, voicing her fear for the first time since they'd fled Copper Creek. Thomas squeezed her hand. I know, so am I, but being afraid doesn't mean we're making the wrong choice. It just means we're taking a path that matters. By late afternoon, Sarah was feeling better, strong enough to walk along the stream where Thomas had spotted wild onions growing. As she gathered them for their evening meal, the sound of approaching horses froze her in place. Thomas appeared instantly at her side, rifle in hand. He pushed her behind him, eyes scanning the ridge above them. "Stay behind me," he whispered. 3 riders appeared at the top of the ridge, not townsfolk from Copper Creek as Sarah had feared, but strangers. The lead rider, a burly man with a thick beard, raised his hand in greeting. "Ho there," he called. "We mean no harm." Thomas kept his rifle ready but lowered it slightly. "State your business, friend." The 3 men approached slowly, hands visible. As they drew closer, Sarah could see they were trail-worn, their clothes dusty from travel. "Name's Daniel Morgan," the bearded man said. "These are my brothers, Joseph and William. We're headed to the gold fields near Helena." Thomas nodded but didn't relax his stance. "Thomas Rutherford." "This is my wife, Sarah." Daniel's eyes flicked briefly to Sarah, noting her simple dress and the way Thomas stood protectively before her. "We've been tracking game and saw your smoke, hoping you might share your fire tonight in exchange for some fresh venison. Got a young buck this morning." Thomas considered the offer, then slowly lowered his rifle completely. "You're welcome to share our camp, but we're traveling light ourselves. Not much to offer beyond coffee and these wild onions my wife was gathering." "Coffee sounds like heaven after 2 weeks of chicory," Joseph, the youngest of the brothers, said with a grin. The Morgan brothers proved to be respectful guests, setting up their bedrolls at a considerate distance from Thomas and Sarah's tent. They shared stories of their journey from Missouri, their hopes of striking it rich in the gold fields, and their encounters along the trail. "Heard there was trouble with some Sioux war parties up north," William mentioned as they sat around the fire after dinner. "Army's been pushing them back onto the reservation, but some bands are still resisting." "That's well east of where we're headed," Thomas replied, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "We're planning to homestead near the Big Horns." Daniel raised his eyebrows. "That's mighty isolated country." "Just the 2 of you, for now," Thomas said, his hand briefly touching Sarah's stomach in a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the brothers. "Well, you seem capable enough," Daniel said, tossing a stick into the fire. "But if you're amenable, we could ride together tomorrow. Added safety in numbers, and our paths run parallel for at least another day." Thomas glanced at Sarah, who nodded slightly. Extra protection wouldn't hurt, especially with her condition making her more vulnerable. "Agreed," Thomas said. "We'll head out at first light." Later, in the privacy of their tent, Sarah whispered, "Do you trust them?" Thomas pulled the blanket higher around them against the night chill. "I trust that they're headed to the gold fields, not looking for trouble. Gold fever is a powerful motivator. They won't waste time harassing a couple of homesteaders when there's fortune to be made elsewhere." Sarah nestled closer to him. "It will be strange tomorrow night, not having anyone else around again." Thomas pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Get used to it, Mrs. Rutherford. It'll be just us for a while until we can establish ourselves and perhaps attract other settlers to the area." "And our child," she reminded him, placing his hand on her abdomen. "And our child," he agreed, his voice filled with wonder. "Our family." The next morning brought clear skies and good traveling conditions. The Morgan brothers proved to be amenable companions, riding ahead as scouts and helping Thomas navigate some of the more challenging terrain. Sarah found herself grateful for their presence, especially when crossing a swollen creek that might have been difficult for just the 2 of them to manage. By mid-afternoon, they reached a fork in the trail. The western path led toward Montana Territory and the gold fields, while the northern route continued toward the Big Horn Mountains. "This is where we part ways," Daniel said, extending his hand to Thomas. "Good luck with your homestead." "And good luck with your gold hunting," Thomas replied, shaking each brother's hand in turn. Joseph, the youngest, approached Sarah with a shy smile. "Madam, I want you to have this." He handed her a small, carved wooden horse. "Made it myself during the evenings on the trail. Might be nice for the little one someday." Sarah accepted the gift, touched by the young man's kindness. "Thank you, Joseph. I'll treasure it." As the Morgan brothers rode west, Thomas and Sarah continued north, the landscape gradually changing from open prairie to more rugged terrain with scattered pine forests and dramatic rock formations. "Not much farther now," Thomas assured her as they made camp that evening. "By tomorrow afternoon, you'll see our valley." Sarah tried to picture it, the place that would become their home, the land where their child would be born and raised. It seemed like an impossible dream after the nightmare of her banishment, yet Thomas spoke of it with such confidence that she couldn't help but believe. The next day dawned with a fine drizzle that soon turned into a steady rain. They pressed on despite the weather, Thomas leading them along a narrow trail that wound between towering pines. By midday, the rain had stopped, and as they crested a ridge, Thomas reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Our valley." Sarah gasped at the vista spread before them. A lush valley stretched for miles, bordered by the foothills of the mountains to the east and a meandering river to the west. The spring rains had turned the landscape emerald green, with wildflowers dotting the meadows in patches of purple, yellow, and white. "Oh, Thomas," she breathed. "It's beautiful." He helped her dismount, and they stood together at the edge of the ridge, surveying what would become their kingdom. In the distance, a herd of elk grazed peacefully, undisturbed by human presence. "I found a perfect spot to build," Thomas said, pointing to a gentle rise near a stand of aspens. "High enough to avoid flooding, sheltered from the north wind by those trees with good southern exposure for a garden. The river's close enough for water, but far enough that we don't need to worry about spring floods." Sarah tried to picture it, a cabin standing where now there was only open meadow, smoke rising from a chimney, perhaps a fence enclosing a vegetable garden. Their home built beyond the walls of judgment and condemnation. "When can we start building?" she asked, practical concerns replacing her awe. Thomas grinned, pleased by her enthusiasm. "No time like the present. Let's make camp by that aspen grove, and tomorrow I'll start felling logs for our cabin." They made their way down into the valley, the horses picking their way carefully along the steep trail. By evening, they had established a camp near the spot Thomas had chosen for their home. He constructed a more substantial shelter than their previous night camps, a lean-to covered with pine boughs that would keep them dry while he worked on building their permanent home. That night, lying beside Thomas under the vast Wyoming sky, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't known was possible. "Do you think anyone will find us here?" she asked. Thomas stroked her hair. "Eventually, perhaps. Settlement is pushing this way slowly but surely, but we'll be established by then, respected landowners with a working ranch. No one will question our right to be here or the legitimacy of our family." Family. The word encompassed so much: the child growing inside her, the man beside her, and the home they would build together. Despite all they had lost, Sarah realized they stood on the threshold of gaining something far more precious. "I love you, Thomas Rutherford," she said, the words coming easily now that they were alone in their valley, away from the judgment of others. "And I love you, Sarah Rutherford," he replied. "You and our child are my whole world now. I'll build us a life here that will make you proud." She believed him. The next morning, Thomas was up at first light, assessing trees for their cabin. He selected tall, straight pines, marking them with notches from his axe. "I'll need to build us a proper shelter before I can start on the permanent cabin," he explained over breakfast. "Something more substantial than this lean-to, but quick enough that we can have it up in a few days." "What can I do to help?" Sarah asked, determined to be a partner in building their new life. Thomas smiled. "If you're feeling up to it, gathering stones for a fire pit would be helpful, and perhaps exploring what wild foods might be available nearby. The supplies Ben gave us won't last forever." Sarah spent the morning collecting stones from the riverbank, while Thomas cut saplings for a temporary structure. By midday, she had discovered wild strawberries growing in a sunny patch near their camp and cattails with edible roots along the river's edge. As the days passed, a rhythm developed to their new life. Thomas worked from dawn till dusk, first completing a sturdy temporary shelter with walls of interwoven saplings covered with pine boughs and a small stone fireplace, then beginning the more substantial work of felling large pines for their permanent cabin. Sarah, meanwhile, established their camp into something resembling a home. She created a storage system for their supplies, fashioned cooking implements from materials at hand, and began mapping the valley's resources where the best berries grew, which streams held the fattest trout, which meadows bloomed with edible plants. 2 weeks after their arrival, their temporary home was comfortable enough that Thomas could focus fully on the cabin. Sarah watched in amazement as he skillfully notched logs to fit together at the corners, creating a structure that grew taller each day. "Where did you learn to build like this?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire, his hands busy carving pegs to secure the roof beams. "My father was a carpenter before he tried his hand at ranching," Thomas explained. "He taught me the basics. The rest I picked up working cattle drives, helping build line shacks and ranch houses across the territory." Sarah thought of her own parents, her father a shopkeeper, her mother a teacher before her marriage. Both had died in the influenza epidemic when Sarah was 16, leaving her alone in the world except for the community of Copper Creek, the same community that had cast her out when she needed them most. "I wish they could have known you," she said softly. "My parents would have loved you." Thomas set down his carving. "Would they have stood by you, do you think, when the town turned against you?" Sarah considered this. "My father, perhaps not, he was very concerned with respectability, but my mother, I think she would have understood. She used to tell me that life rarely follows the neat paths we plan for it." Thomas took her hand. "Our child will grow up knowing nothing but love and acceptance, Sarah, I swear it." By the 4th week in the valley, the basic structure of their cabin was complete: 4 walls of solid pine logs, a pitched roof covered with split shakes, and a stone fireplace that would provide warmth through the coming winter. It was simple but sturdy, with a single room that would serve as kitchen, living area, and bedroom until Thomas could add more rooms. "It's perfect," Sarah declared as she stepped inside for the first time, marveling at the space that was truly theirs. Thomas beamed with pride. "Not perfect yet. Still needs a proper floor, windows with glass, and real furniture. But it will keep us dry and warm for now." That night, they slept in their cabin for the first time on bedrolls spread across the packed earth floor. Despite the rudimentary conditions, Sarah had never felt more at home. The next morning, Sarah awoke alone, the space beside her cold. Stepping outside, she found Thomas atop a rise near the cabin, staring intently toward the eastern edge of the valley. "What is it?" she called, hurrying to join him. "Smoke," he replied, pointing to a thin column rising above the tree line several miles away. "Someone's made camp at the eastern pass." Sarah felt a chill despite the morning warmth. "Copper Creek people, have they found us?" Thomas shook his head. "Not likely. That pass leads from Wyoming Territory. Could be a hunting party or travelers passing through. Should we be concerned, cautious but not afraid?" Thomas put his arm around her shoulders. "This land doesn't belong exclusively to us, Sarah. We need to establish peaceful relations with anyone who passes through or lives nearby." They spent the day watching the smoke, but no visitors appeared. By evening, Thomas had made a decision. "Tomorrow I'll ride out to investigate. If it's natives, better to approach openly than have them discover us by surprise." Sarah felt fear clutch at her heart. "Is that safe? Safer than the alternative?" Thomas cupped her face in his hands. "Trust me, Sarah, I've dealt with the Shoshone before on cattle drives. They're generally peaceful if approached with respect." The next morning, Thomas prepared to leave at first light, loading his rifle but keeping it unthreaded and stored in its saddle holster, a sign of peaceful intentions. "Stay in the cabin," he instructed Sarah. "Keep the door barred, but don't show fear if anyone approaches. I'll be back by midday." Sarah watched him ride away, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly. The baby had begun to show in the weeks since they'd arrived in the valley. a small but definite bump that Thomas delighted in talking to each night. The morning passed with excruciating slowness as Sarah tried to distract herself with tasks cleaning their few cooking implements, organizing their supplies, gathering more wild strawberries that grew in abundance near the cabin. By midday, with no sign of Thomas, anxiety began to gnaw at her. When she heard hoofbeats approaching in the early afternoon, Sarah rushed outside, relief flooding her body only to freeze at the sight before her. Thomas was returning, but he wasn't alone. Beside him rode an older native man on a paint horse, his long gray streaked hair bound in braids, his weathered face dignified. Behind them came two younger men, clearly warriors despite their peaceful demeanor. Thomas raised his hand in greeting. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Chief Running Elk of the Wind River Shoshone. He and his sons, White Wolf and Swift Arrow, are camped in the Eastern Pass." Sarah smoothed her dress nervously and inclined her head. "Welcome to our home, Chief Running Elk." The older man studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in her condition. Then he spoke in heavily accented English. "Your husband tells me you seek peace in this valley, that you were cast out by your own people." Sarah glanced at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes." "Our people did not approve of our child." Running Elk's expression remained impassive. "White people's ways are strange to us. Among my people, children are sacred, always welcome." "As they should be," Thomas said. "We've come here to raise our family in peace, Chief Running Elk. We ask for your blessing to live in this valley." The chief dismounted with the fluid grace of a much younger man. "This valley has long been a place of peace. My people hunt here in summer and fall, but do not winter here. The spirits of this place are strong but gentle." He approached Sarah, stopping a respectful distance away. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her belly. Sarah hesitated only briefly before nodding. Running Elk placed his weathered hand gently on her stomach, closing his eyes as if listening. After a moment, he smiled, the first real expression he had shown. "A strong daughter grows within you," he declared. "A child of two worlds who will bridge many divides." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at this blessing from an unexpected source. "Thank you." Running Elk turned to Thomas. "You may build your home here, but remember that the land is not owned, it is borrowed from those who came before and those who will come after. Treat it with respect, and you will be welcome among my people." Thomas extended his hand, which the chief took in a firm grip. "We will remember." To Sarah's surprise, Running Elk and his sons stayed for a meal, accepting her offer of fresh caught trout and wild greens with appreciation. Through halting conversation, they learned that the Shoshone band was returning from a trading journey to Fort Laramie and would continue to their permanent settlement near the Wind River within a few days. Before departing, White Wolf, the elder son, presented Thomas with a finely crafted hunting knife, its bone handle carved with symbols of protection. Swift Arrow gave Sarah a small pouch of dried medicinal herbs, demonstrating through gestures how they should be brewed for tea during her pregnancy. As the three Shoshone rode away, Sarah turned to Thomas in amazement. "That was unexpected," Thomas nodded, watching the riders disappear into the Eastern Pass. "A good sign, Sarah. Their blessing means more than they might realize." The Shoshone have influence with other tribes in the region. If they consider us friends, others may as well. That evening, as they sat by their hearth fire, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Our daughter," she said, placing Thomas's hand on her belly. Running Elk said, "We're having a daughter." Thomas smiled, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "A daughter who will grow up free from the constraints that bound you in Copper Creek. She'll be strong, independent, a true child of the frontier." "What shall we name her?" Sarah wondered. "We have months yet to decide," Thomas reminded her. "But I've always been partial to Elizabeth after my grandmother. She was a pioneer woman who crossed the plains in a wagon and never complained once, according to my father." "Elizabeth," Sarah repeated, testing the name. "Elizabeth Rutherford." "I like it." As spring gave way to summer, their life in the valley fell into a satisfying rhythm. Thomas completed the cabin, adding a wooden floor, proper windows with oiled paper to let in light. Glass would have to wait until they could travel to a settlement, and furniture crafted from pine and aspen. Sarah created a thriving garden with the seeds Martha Caldwell had given her, supplemented by wild plants she transplanted from around the valley. Thomas built a small corral for the horses and constructed a smokehouse for preserving meat. They were preparing for winter, though it was still months away in the mountains. Survival depended on such foresight. In late July, Running Elk's band returned to hunt in the valley as promised. This time, women and children accompanied the warriors, setting up a temporary camp near the eastern pass. Sarah nervously accepted an invitation to visit, finding herself welcomed by the Shoshone women who clucked over her growing belly and shared their knowledge of childbirth and infant care. Morning Star, Running Elk's wife, took a particular interest in Sarah, showing her how to craft a cradle board and teaching her traditional songs for soothing babies. Despite the language barrier, the two women formed a friendship based on their shared experiences as mothers and their mutual respect. When the Shoshone departed after 2 weeks of hunting, Morning Star embraced Sarah. "We return when snow flies to winter camp beyond eastern mountains," she said in her limited English, "but I come before your baby arrives. Help you." Sarah felt tears of gratitude sting her eyes. "Thank you, Morning Star." Thomas, too, had strengthened his bonds with the Shoshone men, joining them on hunts and learning their methods of tracking and preserving meat. He traded a fine saddle he'd made for several tanned deer hides, which Sarah would use to craft winter clothing. "They've accepted us," Thomas marveled as they watched the Shoshone band depart, "more thoroughly than our own people ever did." As summer waned, they worked with renewed urgency to prepare for the coming winter. Thomas hunted elk and deer, filling their smokehouse with preserved meat. Sarah gathered and dried berries, wild onions, and other plant foods, storing them carefully in the root cellar Thomas had dug beneath their cabin floor. Their most exciting development came in August, when Thomas returned from a hunting trip with an unexpected bounty: 2 young milk cows, a bull calf, and 6 chickens, purchased from a small settlement 3 days' ride to the south that he had discovered by chance. "Settlers from Ohio," he explained as he helped Sarah milk one of the cows. "3 families homesteading together. They're struggling, too many people, not enough skilled hunters or builders. I traded them 2 elk carcasses and promised to help them reinforce their cabins before winter." Sarah stroked the cow's flank, marveling at this connection to the outside world. "Did you tell them about us? Just that my pregnant wife and I were homesteading in the valley. They were too preoccupied with their own troubles to ask many questions." He grinned. "They did invite us to Christmas dinner, though, said no one should be alone for the holidays." The idea of socializing with other settlers, people who knew nothing of their past in Copper Creek, was both thrilling and terrifying to Sarah. "Did you accept?" said we'd try, weather permitting. "It's a hard journey and the best conditions might be impossible once snow flies." He squeezed her shoulder. "But it's good to know we're not completely alone out here." September brought the first hints of autumn to the valley, aspen leaves turning gold, nights growing cooler, geese flying southward in perfect V formations. Sarah's belly had grown substantially, the baby active now, kicking and shifting especially in the quiet evening hours when she and Thomas sat by the fire. "Only a few months to go," Thomas said one night, his hand splayed across her rounded abdomen. "We should be well prepared by then." Sarah nodded, but anxiety gnawed at her. "I wish we had a doctor nearby." "Morning Star promised to come before your time," Thomas reminded her. "And I've delivered foals, calves, and lambs. Human birth can't be so different," Sarah laughed despite her fears. "I certainly hope you don't approach it exactly the same way, Mr. Rutherford." October arrived with the first dusting of snow on the highest peaks surrounding their valley. Thomas worked feverishly to complete their winter preparations, reinforcing the cabin walls with additional chinking, building a lean-to shelter for the livestock, and stockpiling enough firewood to last through the coldest months. Sarah, now finding movement more difficult with her advanced pregnancy, focused on indoor tasks, making candles from tallow, sewing warm clothes from the deer hides, and preparing the corner of the cabin that would serve as their baby's nursery. From aspen wood, Thomas crafted a cradle that he placed near their bed, ready for its tiny occupant. In late October, as the first substantial snowfall blanketed the valley, they received unexpected visitors. Sarah was kneading bread dough when Thomas burst through the door, his expression a mixture of disbelief and wariness. "Riders coming," he said, reaching for his rifle. "At least 4 coming from the South Trail." Sarah's heart pounded. "The Ohio settlers?" "No," Thomas checked his ammunition. "Stay inside." From the window, Sarah watched as Thomas stood on their porch, rifle held casually but ready as the riders approached. To her astonishment, she recognized the lead rider Benjamin Caldwell from the general store in Copper Creek, his beard now streaked with more gray than she remembered. Thomas's posture relaxed slightly as he, too, recognized their old friend. He lowered his rifle and raised a hand in greeting as Benjamin dismounted, followed by 3 strangers, 2 men, and a woman bundled in a heavy coat. Sarah couldn't contain herself. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and hurried outside, her breath clouding in the cold air. "Benjamin." The storekeeper's weathered face broke into a smile. "Sarah Fairfield, no, Sarah Rutherford now. Look at you, blooming like a spring flower." His eyes widened at the sight of her pregnant belly, now impossible to miss. "And nearly ready to deliver, I see." Thomas put his arm protectively around Sarah. "What brings you all the way to our valley, Ben?" "That's a long journey from Copper Creek." Benjamin gestured to his companions. "This is Dr. James Harrigan and his wife, Clara, and this young fellow is Peter Schmidt, their assistant." The 3 newcomers nodded in greeting. "Dr. Harrigan has taken over Dr. Miller's practice in Copper Creek. They're touring the outlying areas to introduce themselves to scattered homesteaders." Thomas invited them inside, his manner cautious but hospitable. Once seated around the fire with cups of hot coffee, Benjamin explained further. "When Dr. Harrigan mentioned he was planning to visit the northern settlements before winter set in, I volunteered to guide him. Truthfully, I've been worried about you 2 out here all alone, especially with the baby coming." Sarah felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "That's very kind, Benjamin." Clara Harrigan, a plump, motherly woman with kind eyes, moved to sit beside Sarah. "Benjamin told us something of your situation on the journey. May I?" She gestured towards Sarah's belly. Sarah nodded, and Clara placed practiced hands on her abdomen, feeling the baby's position. "Strong heartbeat," she murmured. "Head down already good. When are you due, my dear?" "December, we think," Sarah replied. "Perhaps around Christmas." Dr. Harrigan stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "A difficult time for a birth, with the passes likely to be snowed in." He glanced at his wife. "Clara is a midwife as well as my nurse. Perhaps she should stay." Clara nodded immediately. "I was thinking the same, James. I could stay until the birth and return with Benjamin when he makes his spring supply run." Sarah gasped, looking from Clara to Benjamin to Thomas. "You do that for us?" Clara patted her hand. "My dear, no woman should face childbirth alone in the wilderness if it can be helped. Besides, Benjamin tells us you have comfortable quarters and plenty of provisions. I'll hardly be suffering." Thomas looked stunned by this unexpected blessing. "We would be forever in your debt, Mrs. Harrigan." Dr. Harrigan spent the remainder of the day examining Sarah and instructing Thomas on what to expect during the birth. Meanwhile, Benjamin shared news from Copper Creek, most of which Sarah found she cared little about, except for one significant development. "Mayor Wilson contracted tuberculosis in the summer," Benjamin said quietly. "He passed last month. The town council has elected Harold Parker as the new mayor." "Parker?" Thomas raised his eyebrows. He was the only one who spoke against Sarah's banishment. Benjamin nodded. Times are changing in Copper Creek. The railroad's coming through next year. New folks arriving monthly who care less about old moral judgments and more about building a future. He hesitated. There's been talk of inviting you both back, actually. Parker's been asking where you settled. Sarah exchanged glances with Thomas, surprised to feel no longing for her former home. This is our home now, she said firmly. Our child will be born here in the home her father built beyond their walls of judgment. Benjamin smiled. I thought you might say that. But the invitation stands, should you ever wish to visit. No banishment order will be enforced as long as Parker's mayor. The visitors stayed 3 days, during which time Dr. Harrigan helped Thomas butcher an elk, preserving additional meat for the winter. Clara organized Sarah's birthing supplies and taught her breathing techniques for labor. Peter, the young assistant, proved handy with tools, helping Thomas complete a storage shed he'd been building. When it came time for the men to leave, the parting was emotional but optimistic. I'll return in April with the spring thaw, Benjamin promised. Earlier if weather permits. Dr. Harrigan shook Thomas's hand firmly. You've built something remarkable here, Rutherford. Many men talk of striking out on their own, but few have the courage and skill to actually succeed. As they watched the 3 men ride away, Clara stood beside Sarah, their breath mingling in the cold air. They'll be fine, she assured her. Benjamin knows these trails better than most. Thank you for staying, Sarah said, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude. I didn't realize how frightened I was until you offered to help, Clara smiled. That's quite a man you married, willing to build you a new life away from those who judged you, and you're quite a woman for having the courage to come with him. She patted Sarah's belly. This little one is lucky indeed to have such parents. November brought heavy snows and bitter cold, but the cabin remained snug and warm. Clara proved to be not only a skilled midwife but a delightful companion, sharing stories of her travels with Dr. Harrigan and teaching Sarah new recipes that made creative use of their stored provisions. Thomas continued to hunt on clear days, bringing home rabbits and occasionally a deer to supplement their food stores. He also worked on indoor projects crafting additional furniture, including a rocking chair for Sarah that Clara declared essential for a new mother. As Sarah's due date approached, Morning Star arrived as promised, appearing one snowy morning on snowshoes with a pack of supplies and her eldest daughter, Singing Bird, to assist. There was a moment of tension when Clara first encountered the Shoshone women, but it quickly dissolved into mutual respect as they recognized in each other the same purpose to ensure a safe birth for Sarah and her child. 2 midwives better than 1, Morning Star declared pragmatically, and Clara couldn't help but agree. December arrived with a blizzard that lasted 3 days, howling around their cabin but failing to penetrate the solid walls Thomas had built. When it cleared, the valley lay transformed under a pristine blanket of white, breathtakingly beautiful in the winter sunlight. First winter in our home, Thomas said, standing with his arm around Sarah as they looked out over their land. First of many. Sarah, now enormous with child and uncomfortable most of the time, leaned against him gratefully. Do you ever regret it, leaving everything behind for this? Thomas turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. Not for a single moment. Everything I truly need is right here. On December 21st, the winter solstice, Sarah's labor began gentle contractions that gradually increased in intensity as the day progressed. Clara and Morning Star worked together seamlessly, their different traditions complementing rather than contradicting each other as they guided Sarah through her labor. Thomas remained by her side throughout, wiping her brow, supporting her back, and whispering encouragement even as his own face betrayed his worry. Singing Bird kept the fire blazing and water boiling, while also preparing a special tea Morning Star had brought for strength during childbirth. As night fell on the longest night of the year, Sarah's labor intensified. The baby comes with the returning sun, Morning Star declared, a powerful sign. Shortly after midnight, with one final, tremendous effort, Sarah brought their daughter into the world, a robust, red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair who announced her arrival with a powerful cry. "Elizabeth," Thomas whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as Clara placed the swaddled infant in his arms. "Our Elizabeth." Sarah, exhausted but radiant, reached for her daughter. "Elizabeth Morningstar Rutherford," she amended, glancing at the Shoshone woman who had helped bring her child safely into the world. Morningstar's weathered face creased in a smile as she acknowledged this honor with a dignified nod. In the days that followed, their cabin became a cocoon of warmth and new life. Elizabeth proved to be a strong, healthy baby with a hearty appetite and her father's blue eyes. Thomas couldn't stop marveling at her tiny perfection, spending hours simply watching her sleep. Morningstar and Singing Bird remained for a week, showing Sarah traditional methods for soothing the baby and helping her regain her strength. Before departing for their winter camp, Morningstar presented them with a beautifully crafted cradle board decorated with protective symbols. "For when she grows bigger," she explained, "to carry her safely on journeys." Clara stayed on as promised, her experienced presence a comfort as Sarah adjusted to motherhood. January passed in a peaceful blur of feeding, changing, and adoring their new addition. Despite the bitter cold outside, their cabin remained a haven of warmth and contentment. In February, they celebrated their first anniversary, a year since they had fled Copper Creek in disgrace. A year since Thomas had promised to build their home beyond the walls of judgment. Clara prepared a special meal, and Thomas presented Sarah with a hand-carved music box he had been working on in secret, which played a lullaby for Elizabeth. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Sarah confessed that night as they lay in bed, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her cradle beside them. "When they banished me, I thought my life was over." Thomas pulled her close. "Instead, it was just beginning our real life, together." March brought the first signs of spring, longer days, melting snow, and the return of birdsong to the valley. Elizabeth grew stronger daily, now smiling and cooing at her parents, her personality beginning to emerge. In early April, as promised, Benjamin appeared on the trail from the south, this time accompanied by Dr. Harrigan and Peter, come to escort Clara home. Their reunion was joyous, with much exclaiming over Elizabeth's growth and health. "You've done well, Doctor," Harrigan told Thomas and Sarah as he examined the baby. "She's thriving." Benjamin had brought letters and newspapers from Copper Creek, along with seeds for Sarah's garden and tools Thomas had requested. He also carried surprising news. "The railroad survey has been completed," he announced over dinner. "They're laying track 20 miles south of here by summer's end. There's a settlement growing already at the planned station stores, a hotel, even talk of a school." Thomas looked thoughtful. "That would put a proper town within reasonable traveling distance." "Indeed," Benjamin agreed. "And there's more. The territorial governor has approved funds for a road from the railroad to the northern settlements. It would pass within 5 miles of your valley." Sarah glanced at Thomas, seeing the mixture of excitement and wariness in his eyes. Their isolation had been both a challenge and a protection. How would their life change with civilization drawing closer? As spring blossomed into summer, the Rutherford homestead flourished. Thomas expanded their livestock to include sheep and more cattle, building a proper barn to house them. Sarah's garden produced abundantly, and she learned to preserve the harvest for the coming winter. Elizabeth grew into a happy, curious baby, delighting in the natural world around her. Morningstar and her family returned to hunt in the valley as promised, and Elizabeth became a favorite among the Shoshone children, who treated her like a tiny princess. In August, Thomas and Sarah made their first journey to the new railroad settlement, now called Providence Junction. Elizabeth, secured in her Shoshone cradleboard on Sarah's back, attracted curious but friendly attention from the townspeople. To Sarah's surprise, no one questioned their presence or their story. They were simply another family seeking supplies and conversation, respected for their obvious success as homesteaders rather than judged for any perceived moral failings. "It's different here," Sarah remarked as they rode home, their pack horses laden with supplies. "No one cares about our past." Thomas nodded. "The frontier has always offered second chances to those brave enough to seize them." Their second winter in the valley was easier than the first, with better preparations and the confidence born of experience. Elizabeth celebrated her first birthday as snow fell outside their windows, now properly glazed with glass Thomas had brought from Providence Junction. By her second spring, Elizabeth was walking and talking, a spirited toddler with her father's adventurous nature and her mother's gentle heart. Thomas began teaching her to ride, seated before him on Rusty's back, her delighted laughter echoing across the valley. As their third summer in the valley approached, Sarah discovered she was expecting their second child. Thomas's joy was boundless, and Elizabeth, now old enough to understand something of what was happening, patted her mother's still flat stomach with solemn importance. "Baby," she declared. "Elizabeth's baby." "That's right, sweetheart," Sarah agreed. "You're going to be a big sister." On a warm evening in June, as they sat on the porch Thomas had added to their now expanded cabin, watching Elizabeth chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "When they banished me from Copper Creek, I thought it was the end," she said softly. "I never imagined it would lead to all this." Thomas took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Sometimes the walls others build to keep us out become the very boundaries we need to break through to find our true home." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, watching their daughter's joyful exploration of the world they had created for her, a world without judgment, without artificial constraints, a world built on love and acceptance. "Then I'll build our home beyond their walls," Thomas had promised that fateful day when they banished her for being with child. And he had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined, creating not just a shelter of logs and stone, but a true home where their family could grow in love and freedom. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting their valley in hues of gold and purple, Sarah felt a profound gratitude for the life they had forged together. Beyond the walls of judgment lay a world of infinite possibilities, and they were just beginning to explore them.